actually going. Yep, that's the mic you're using. Okay, so we are now live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Center for Lunar Science and Exploration Hangout series. Each month, we try and bring you a new take on how various NASA teams are working on exploring our moon and other rocky bodies around our solar system. Now, this week, we're going to include in those lists of rocky bodies our own planet Earth and how we can explore it to find hints of other parts of our solar system by finding meteorites. With me is special guest David Blewett, and he's going to talk to us about lunar anomalies and about searching for meteorites in the cold, cold, cold Antarctic environments. And he's coming to us from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. And welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, thanks, Pamela. It's a lot of fun to be doing this with you. Yeah, I'm a planetary scientist here in the Planetary Exploration Group at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, which is in Maryland. A lot of you have probably heard of the Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, which is in California and is quite famous for flying planetary missions. But APL is affiliated with Johns Hopkins, and we're here on the East Coast. We're the other PL, and we have built a few missions, planetary spacecraft you may have heard of, such as the MESSENGER orbiter, which was the first spacecraft to orbit the planet Mercury. That lasted from 2011 to 2015. And New Horizons, which flew past the large Kuiper Belt object called Pluto a couple years ago and is on its way to explore another Kuiper Belt object here in a few more years. So I'm interested, as Pam said, in the airless rocky bodies of our solar system. I've done a lot of research on the moon, and we'll be talking about some really fascinating lunar features, I guess, in the third half of our broadcast. But to start off, we're going to talk about searching for meteorites in Antarctica. And I was very fortunate to be part of a scientific expedition a number of years ago that goes pretty much every year to Antarctica to search for and collect meteorites.
So that's the ANSMET project, I believe, the Antarctic Search for Meteorites.
That's right. Yeah, it's a project that the National Science Foundation has been funding since the mid 70s. And you might wonder, well, you know, why go to Antarctica to look for meteorites? It turns out that it's one of the best places on Earth to find meteorites. And there's several reasons for that. Of course, meteorites, which are little bits of asteroids for the most part, although there are a few meteorites that come from either Mars or the moon. But these small asteroids occasionally find themselves in their wanders through the solar system, crossing the Earth's orbit at the same time that the Earth is there. In other words, the meteorite collides with the Earth. If it survives passage through our atmosphere, it can fall to the ground as a piece big enough for someone to find. Now, of course, most of them just drop into the ocean because most of the Earth is covered with oceans, 70% or something like that. Now, if a rock falls out of the sky and no one happens to see it, and it just lands in the woods here in Maryland, or more or less most places, before too long, the forces of erosion, of modification caused by our oxygen in our atmosphere and water, rain, so forth, a typical meteorite might not look too different from any other rock to the non-specialist before too long.
So this is basically weathering problems that will
Sure.
change how the meteorite looks, get rid of the shininess that it might have after getting slightly melted coming through our atmosphere, that will bury it and splatter it and everything else. So basically meteorites end up getting masqueraded as actual rocks, don't they?
Yeah, as just ordinary Earth rocks. And we'll get to see a little example of that next. But maybe, Pam, if you could go to the next slide, the meteorite concentration. Yeah, so this shows what happens in Antarctica. So, you know, these rocks just fall randomly over the continent, and they tend to get buried up in the snow. And the snow, and as it's compressed into ice, the ice sheet is thickest towards the center of the continent, and it just flows under its own weight down slope towards the coasts. And so any meteorites that fall, they sort of carried along like a conveyor belt, as you can see in this picture. Now, when the flow of ice encounters some obstacle, like a mountain range, the flow lines tend to move up towards the surface. And because the air in Antarctica is very dry and there can be very high winds, the ice can just evaporate away. And you're just left with a deposit of these rocks that have been carried along and just stranded on the surface. So there are places you can go in Antarctica where you walk around on the ice and every rock you find will be a meteorite, which is a pretty incredible thing.
Now,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to pull up one of the photos that you have of this experience, and it really is kind of amazing. You look at this, and it's just rock after rock after rock, most of which have that distinctive appearance of being a meteorite. Now, looking at this, there's a few that my untrained eye would guess are probably actual rocks. How do you tell the difference between space rocks and terrestrial rocks?
Yeah, how do you tell between meteorites and meteorongs? That's the key.
Exactly.
Yeah, this picture was taken in a place where there's a lot of glacial material, rocks that were ground up along the base of the glacier and later brought to the surface. And so there's a mixture of these earth rocks with the meteorites. And in this particular place, there's an awful lot of earth rocks there. I think it's the one that's smack in the middle of the picture that looks kind of vaguely hexagonal, just in this view. But one way we can tell is that we would often carry a magnet with us. And most meteorite types, though not all, and in fact some of the most important and interesting types of meteorites, do not actually have enough iron in them to make them stick to a magnet. But many will.
And so this is that difference between the iron meteorites and the earthy chondrite meteorites. And isn't it true that most of the asteroids out there aren't metal, and in fact metal is a very small part of all of the asteroids?
Right. So yeah, there are iron nickel meteorites, which are basically just giant chunks of stainless steel, or hand-sized chunks of stainless steel. And we think they come from the core of asteroids that collided with each other and were broken apart, you know, in the distant past for the most part. And so there are some asteroids that we suspect are just these bare chunks of iron metal. And there's a new mission called the Psyche Mission, which was recently selected by NASA, which is going to investigate one of those suspected iron asteroids. It's an asteroid called Psyche. And so that'll be a really fascinating mission because, you know, we've explored rocky objects, and in the outer solar system, we've explored icy objects, but we've never explored a metal world here in our solar system.
That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great mission.
And so you went down to Antarctica, and this seems like it was a rather Harrowing experience if you weren't an entirely brave human being. From landing on essentially an airplane with sleds,
with skis,
to
yeah.
yeah, to you tent camped the entire time. What did you go through in order to do your science?
Yeah, well, the teams that are selected to go on this are, for the most part, planetary scientists, people who study meteorites, people who are other types of planetary scientists. They do have a mountaineering expert, a crevasse expert, someone who's trained in kind of wilderness survival and knows how to recognize a crevasse, which is a big crack in the ice that maybe the snow has bridged across. And if you step on that, you could fall down and into the deep, icy blue darkness and perish down there. So they do have some extra experts to sort of keep track of us scientists and make sure we don't get into too much trouble. But yeah, we lived in a Scott tent, which was that yellow tent that you saw there for about 2 months while we did our field work. So yeah, you just, I'm not the kind of person who really likes the cold, but when you're down there, you expect it to be cold and you're always dressed for it. And they give you very good cold weather gear. And so, the worst days were when the wind was really blowing. When it's really windy, then you can get really cold. Some days we were confined to our tents because if there's kind of a blowing snow or whiteout conditions, it's just too dangerous to be out trying to walk around or drive your snowmobiles. So occasionally there could be tent days where you were just stuck indoors the whole time.
Now the challenge is always finding those meteorites that are from somewhere special, the ones that are occasionally from Mars. When you're out in the field collecting these rocks, you have the ability to tell things like what's the albedo compared to other rocks, so how much light does it reflect, how black is it essentially, and you can get a sense of, is this magnetic or not? Can you really tell how special your finds are before they get back to the lab?
Not always. In a few cases, if you can see, fusion crust on part of it and the nature of the minerals that are inside, but then say maybe it doesn't stick well to a magnet, then you think, well, this is a meteorite, but it's not a chondritic meteorite. Chondrite's kind of the most common type of meteorites that fall on Earth. They do have enough iron metal in them that they'll stick to a magnet. So if it doesn't stick, it's not a chondrite. It's not an iron meteorite, but you can tell it's a meteorite because it's got fusion crust, indicating that it melted as it was from the friction of passing through the Earth's atmosphere at such high speed. Then you might have an idea that it's something interesting, maybe from the moon, maybe from Mars, or from some real unusual asteroid, or maybe even someday from Mercury. That's a quest. Do we have any rocks from Mercury? There haven't been any identified for sure yet, but
that would be amazing.
Someday there will be one.
And there's always the chance that they came from moons, Phobos, Deimos, other rocky objects scattered about our solar system, but it will probably be a long time before we have enough information to tell which ones came from those weird places.
Yeah, connecting a particular meteorite to its parent body, as we say, that's one of the quests of planetary science. But yeah, we need more information in situ on those asteroids or Phobos or Deimos or even Mercury. We could use more data on to try to make those links.
And in situ is basically a fancy way of saying we need to go land things there and cut up the rocks to find out what's inside of them so that we can match rocks from these other places with rocks here on Earth.
Yeah, doing measurements of that tell us information about the minerals that are present. So rocks are made of minerals, and then what elements are present to make up the minerals. So that can be done either with instruments, directly landed on a body, or of course with return samples, but that's even more expensive.
And we haven't so far been able to do return samples from anywhere except for the moon. And this is where we're all looking so forward to the results of OSIRIS-REx going to Bennu, and of, we hope, the Mars 2020 rover and a future mission that will bring back rocks that it collects.
Yep.
But for now, are you using any of these rocks yourself?
No, my particular research deals more with mainly with the moon and Mercury. I am doing some asteroid research from the Near-Earth Asteroid Rendezvous mission that went to the Near-Earth Asteroid Eros about 17 years ago or so. I'm doing some work with data from that mission, but I'm not a petrologist, somebody who really tortures rocks to get all their secrets out,
And that's one of the awesome things about this summer meteorite hunt, is it does allow so many different scientists who aren't necessarily asteroid scientists, not necessarily meteorite scientists, to go down and be part of these teams and learn another side of planetary science.
Yeah, exploration, it's great. I'll never be an astronaut, but I did get to do that.
and it's probably almost as dangerous some days.
Well, I don't know about that, but and there are a few people who were astronauts who have gone on the Antarctic Search for Meteorites expeditions in the past. At least a couple, I think.
That's cool. Now what you actually do is you look at what I think are some of the neatest lunar features out there, and this is the lunar magnetic anomalies.
Right.
I'm going to bring up the Rainier Gamma.
Rainier Gamma, yeah.
Yes. As I said earlier, if I can possibly mispronounce something, I will. And if you could explain what these anomalies are and what it is that we're looking at, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Sure. Okay. So it turns out that there are places on the moon where we have been able to measure a magnetic field. Now, the moon doesn't have a global magnetic field that's generated by an internal dynamo the way, say, the Earth and Mercury do. It's possible it had one in the distant past. So it was kind of surprising that we found, first with Apollo, some of the sub-satellites that the Apollo command modules released, and then with later missions, in particular Lunar Prospector in the late 1990s, measured the magnetic field of the moon. And they found that there are certain areas of the crustal rocks that have a magnetic field. And as it happens, most of these magnetic anomalies are correlated with these very strange surface markings. Now, my first picture that you can, I'm not sure if we can see that one yet.
Yeah, I just switched over to it. Yep.
Okay. This is a telescopic view of the moon taken from the Earth. This is over on the western limb in Oceanus Procellarum. And what you see there are some craters, impact craters, but then there's also a funny kind of tadpole-shaped marking. And this is called the Rainier Gamma swirl. And it's the most famous example of what we call lunar swirls on the moon. Now, they're unusual bright markings, and maybe we could go to the next picture, number 2.
Yep.
And that is a view, image taken by the Clementine spacecraft, which orbited the moon back in 1994 for a couple months. And before Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, Clementine returned the first set of modern digital images that we had for the moon. And you can see Reiner Gamma there. Again, it's this kind of funny, sinuous tadpole looking feature, and it's all told, it's a couple hundred kilometers long, and you can see it's very bright, has this curvy shape, and there are some what we call dark lanes that are found within the bright portions of the swirl. Now, something that's interesting is that the swirls don't seem to have any topography associated with them. That is, they're not elevated at all. They just seem like they're a bright,
these are just color features, basically.
Yeah, albedo or brightness or color features that are kind of just draped on the lunar surface with no measurable thickness that we can tell. So there are a number of ideas about how these things formed. One of them has to do with the presence of that magnetic field, because as it happens, the solar wind, which is the flow of protons and electrons for the most part, that just kind of streams out from this solar atmosphere out into the solar system, those particles can be deflected by magnetic fields. And so over most of the moon receives bombardment from these protons. But to some degree, the magnetic fields protect the surface from that bombardment. And so that might have something to do with preventing the normal soil darkening process that takes place on the moon. Now, this is why bright, fresh young craters have bright crater rays, but they must fade away with time because older, more rounded, worn, eroded craters do not have these rays. So something is taking place to cause the rays to fade away.
And this weathering, isn't it thought to be like a steady stream of little tiny meteorites, micrometeorites, and also the effects of lunar vibrations from when the moon gets hit by bigger objects?
Yeah, so the so-called space weathering on the moon is thought to be caused by two different agents, but we're not really sure which one is most important or which one dominates. So one is, as you said, the micrometeoroid bombardment. The moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so all those little dust grains and sand-sized things that come zinging in at their full cosmic velocities, they do a lot of melting and vaporization. But then there's also the role of these solar wind particles. And there's quite a bit of debate in the scientific community as to which one of these is really most important. But kind of the suggestion from the lunar swirls and the presence of those magnetic fields is that when you screen off the solar wind, you don't get that soil darkening, the weathering process, the same way. Now, however, there are some other ideas there. There's one proposal that this bright markings are caused by scouring of the surface by the impact of a comet. In other words, the comet's outer atmosphere, the gas and dust in a comet's coma, when it strikes the moon, it kind of, there's sort of winds almost that blow and scouring that takes place. And that maybe that is the cause of these unusual bright markings in these funny patterns. And then there's another, yeah, go ahead.
Now, I'm trying to figure out how you explain the, well, squiggly swirly bits and the residual magnetic field from a comet. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, the person who has the chief proponent of this model suggests that the ionized plasma in the comet's coma, that is, protons and electrons, that when this plasma is compressed against the moon's surface, there can be effects that would amplify any weaker ambient fields that are around and cause that strong field to be basically imprinted on the lunar surface.
So this is a fancier version of leaving the magnet on your sewing shears, and your shears become magnets.
Yeah, kind of. So in this case, this hypothesis, you make the swirl and you make the magnetic anomaly at the same time. Whereas the other ideas, well, we're standing off the solar wind. That's what causes the magnetic anomaly, or that's what causes the swirl. But we've got to make the magnetic anomaly some other way. And one of those hypotheses has to do with basin ejecta. So when a very large impact occurs, there's a lot of material that's vaporized. There can be, again, these sort of plasma effects where any ambient fields are amplified and concentrated. Maybe when all that ejecta goes the whole way around the moon and converges on the other side of the so-called antipode, the point diametrically opposite the moon from where the impact occurred. And there's some evidence that a lot of the magnetic anomalies are at the antipodes of the major impact basins. So Crisium, Imbrium, Orientale, and so forth.
And so that's in line with you hammer on something and it will become a magnet temporarily.
Well, sort of. Yeah, it has to do with this expanding cloud of vaporized material.
Okay.
That gets ejected from the cavity of the large impact basin. And through some complicated physical effects, may be able to produce and amplify a magnetic field and end up with a deposit, a big old slug of ejecta that comes out that has a magnetic signature.
Now there's more than just the one of these, and I'm gonna go ahead and pull up your next slide. Have we been able to send anything to go rove around in these yet, or are we still limited to staring at them from our orbiting robots?
Yeah, we're still limited to looking at them from orbit. This picture you have up here right now, it says copyright JAXA. So this was, of course, the Japan Space Agency's Selene or Kaguya lunar orbiter that was launched just about 10 years ago. The fantastic thing about this mission is that it had a forward-looking HD TV camera provided by NHK, the Japanese TV network. And you can see in this picture this gorgeous lunar swirls on the far side of the moon in the northern, in what's called Mare Ingenii. And I just love this view because the images from this forward-looking HD camera really give you the feeling that you're in orbit over the moon and are just flying over them. But again, you can see the really beautiful, complicated shapes of those bright patches, more especially the ones on the left there, the kind of sinuous shapes. So this is another gorgeous example back there on the far side. And so the most obvious lunar swirls are in the Maria, that is the dark lava plains on the moon. But if you go to the next one, number 4, it says Firsov. Yeah, I love this picture. This is a Highland swirl. The Highlands are the brighter, more rugged parts that we see when we look at the moon. This image was taken by Apollo 10. Okay, that's those guys who went to the moon before Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins. Apollo 10 was a dress rehearsal where they had the lunar lander. They separated from the command module and went down to a lower orbit, but they didn't go down and land. They came back up, reunited with the command module, and then came back to the Earth. But they, they did some science too. They took this fabulous picture of this Highland swirl near the crater Firsov. And here you can see the complicated shapes, the just general bright nature of it. It's a great historic picture and just a beautiful, beautiful thing.
And for perspective, one of the amazing things about the Apollo photographs is these these are hand focused, figuring out the light metering themselves. This was in the days of fully manual cameras, and they got it right.
It was a Hasselblad handheld film camera. Some of your viewers probably not even familiar with what a film camera was, but yeah, fantastic.
So these are just all kind of amazing examples of what all is possible with the lunar anomalies, and trying to figure out where to go next, trying to figure out exactly how to explain them. What are you looking forward to doing next in your study of these lunar anomalies?
Well, there's been a lot that the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter mission has contributed to swirl studies. Taking pictures in the ultraviolet, it turns out that swirls are can be mapped more easily in the ultraviolet. The Diviner Lunar Radiometer has provided some important data for swirls. For myself, I'm presently advocating for a rover mission to go and explore one of the most famous lunar swirls. We would probably go to the Reiner Gamma swirl, and I'm trying to kind of build a coalition and get a groundswell of support from the community, so that we could maybe have a discovery mission or a discovery proposal anyway that would go investigate one of these fantastic and mysterious lunar features.
And as you point out, they're nice and smooth, and that makes it easy for a rover to rove. It really doesn't get better than that.
Right.
So you've been doing a whole lot of different amazing things. If our audience wanted to go learn more about what you're doing and follow along in your science, where can they go?
Well, at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, we have a web page for the staff scientists here, those of us who are in the so-called civil space group. So probably if you just did a search for APL Planetary Exploration Group, you would get yourself to that web page, and you could be able to find me and all my colleagues. We have one of the largest, perhaps the largest group of planetary scientists in the country here at APL in the Planetary Exploration Group.
And as you pointed out, it's a really remarkable group doing a lot of really cool spacecraft that are really opening new doors. MESSENGER was the first one to give us a complete look at Mercury. We didn't have that previously. And Pluto, I think we're all still kind of in awe of the results that team brought back. And I look forward to seeing what rovers that you have planned for our future and our ability to explore new small and large rocky worlds throughout our solar system. This has been a really fast-going 30 minutes. Do you have any parting words you want to leave our audience?
Oh boy, you should have warned me ahead of time. Well, no, I think planetary exploration by robots and hopefully with humans is a tremendously exciting undertaking, and we're just really fortunate that we live in a country that's wealthy enough to devote a tiny, tiny, tiny sliver of our resources, a very small fraction of our federal budget, to these kinds of pursuits of the imagination. It's just amazing. I'm very fortunate to be part of it, and I hope that we can inspire future generations of explorers and bring along the general public with us as we communicate the excitement and wonder of our solar system.
That is a really good way to look at it. And thanks for reminding us just how lucky we are to get to do the science we do. And thank you to all of us, all of you out there in our viewing audience. Quick shout out to Kyle, Daniel, Bill, and all the folks out there. giving us a view during live. For those of you who didn't catch this live, you can turn in every third Wednesday of the month at 7:30 p.m. Central Time, which is 8:30 Eastern and 5:30 Pacific. And I hope to see you in future months because the science just keeps going. Thank you and have a good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you may be in the world.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Pamela.